Thank you for attending this talk for the 2020 SENCER Summer Institute. My name is Francesca Williamson, and I'm a postdoc for the Center for Urban Ecology and Sustainability at Butler University. The work I'll be sharing today is part of a broader research project that explores student civic mindedness and interaction with place. Before we begin, I want to invite you to extend this conversation to social media. By doing so, I hope we can work together to make this presentation more interactive and broaden the perspectives and audiences we can include in thinking through collectivist and individualist orientations during the COVID pandemic. To give you a brief overview of our time together, we'll start with a moment to pause and reflect. At 2 points during the presentation, you'll hit pause to make links between the ideas presented today and your specific context. Most of the presentation will focus on the results of the pilot study, and then I'll share practices to support values and identity development. For the first pause and reflect activity, go ahead and hit the pause button and take 30 seconds to write your thoughts about collectivism and individualism and how they relate to your work. On the screen, I've shared a sticky note that I wrote for the pause and reflect activity. I associated the word interdependence with collectivism and self with individualism. After thinking about it, I thought culture was related to both. It is important to note that our views will be shaped by our culture, backgrounds, occupations, and experiences. Within our evolving social, economic, and environmental landscape, there is a potential for college students to experience shifts in their values, identities, and goals. For this study, we focused on individualism and collectivism because research has shown that these value systems shape whether we contribute to sustainability and change. Individualism and collectivism can be understood as complex worldviews or behavioral patterns that differ in the degree to which they prioritize an individual versus a group. These patterns include a vertical dimension that emphasizes hierarchies and a horizontal dimension that emphasizes equality. At the end of the spring term, we surveyed students about their well-being as well as their perceived shifts in individualism and collectivism during the pandemic. Other researchers have found that college students experienced increased stress and anxiety during COVID, which was also the case for our participants. Today, I'll share the results about their shifts in individualism and collectivism. Vertical individualism emphasizes social hierarchies and views the self as independent. An example survey item asked participants whether their feelings about the statement, "winning is everything," decreased or increased during the pandemic. Just over half the participants reported decreases in vertical individualism. By contrast, horizontal individualism maintains a self-reliant or independent stance, but emphasizes equality. About 67% of participants reported increases in horizontal individualism. They agreed with statements such as, "I often do my own thing," which may relate to the social distancing required to flatten the curve. The majority of participants reported increases in both collectivism dimensions. 85% of participants reported increases in vertical collectivism, a worldview wherein one recognizes social hierarchies and sees themselves as part of a collective. For example, participants indicated that they were more willing to make sacrifices for others. Over 90% of the participants reported increases in horizontal collectivism. Within this worldview, one emphasizes equality and prioritizes the group over self. This worldview is also aligned with social justice and equity principles. Participants reported increases in positive feelings about cooperation and a concern for the well-being of others. Overall, a large majority of participants reported increases in both collectivism dimensions. Though participants were split in their shifts in individualism, some of the positive shifts may be complicated by increased calls for personal responsibility and social distancing to reduce the transmission of COVID. One important implication of this study is that shifts in values may create tensions for students, or at least make visible the complex and sometimes contradictory ways they see themselves in society. As educators, it will be important to create opportunities for students to reflect on their values in our changing world. Now I'll turn to some examples of concrete practices that can support students to reflect on their values and identities. I want to invite you to amplify this conversation through social media, with colleagues, and students, as we're all co-learners and co-participants in creating effective and meaningful learning experiences. The first practice is a multidisciplinary effort. Faculty teaching a range of courses, such as business and environmental science, use place-based pedagogy so that students can learn about and compare the social, economic, and environmental impact of sustainable versus industrial farming practices. This supports deep learning and encourages students to consider their values. To learn more about this project, attend the poster presentation by Dr. Julia Angstmann. The second practice is Photovoice, a research method used to study community problems and promote social change. Photovoice can be used to enhance students' learning about social and environmental issues. Students can, for example, study access to clean water with the Photovoice project and critically reflect using the Deal model of critical reflection. Now take a moment to reflect about practices you could incorporate into your work. We've only addressed the tip of the iceberg by examining individualism and collectivism as it relates to COVID. With increased national protest against anti-Black racism and police brutality, and elevated concerns about climate change, all alongside COVID, our future work will need to consider the cumulative impact of these conditions on student values. Here's a full list of the references for your convenience. Thank you for attending this presentation. We look forward to hearing your thoughts and perspectives.